Welcome. My name is Grandma Storm. I write stories for young adults. Today I am reading chapters 1 through 5 in my book, 146 BC. Chapter 1. Running through the wood to the river, the branches whipped her face. Tears blinded her eyes. Fear choked her, but still she called over and over again for her little sister. Un, Un! Wiping the tears away, Rin desperately hoped to see our red-headed toddler playing in the shallows. When she did, she would grab the naughty thing and drag her back home, all the while loudly thanking all the gods she could think of. Un was playing under the table when Mor, Rin's mother, went to the sheepfold to call the men for the noonday meal. Rin was scraping a sheepskin by the old oaks and heard the call. She knew Mor needed her to help serve the men. Rin stuck the stone knife inside her leather belt, tossed back her thick brown braids, and ran to help her mother. The men stomped in the house and sat at the table. Esmond smiled at Rin, but he really shouldn't have. He was too old now to acknowledge his sister. Even though he was younger than Rin, he did a man's work and was learning a man's life. While she sang, Mor handed Rin bowls of mutton and a basket of rye bread, which Rin hurried to the table. Unseen, Rin snatched a roll and pocketed it in her tunic. She watched the men shove meat in their big mouths. She was hoping they would leave enough for Mor, Un, and herself. Mutton was a treat. The stolen roll was just in case. Mor stopped singing. Rin looked away from the men to notice a worried look on Mor's face. "Have you seen Un?" "No," answered Rin. "She was playing under the table with the white kitten, but she isn't there now. The kitten is gone too. I'll finish serving the men. Go outside and find her. I pray to Freya she keeps little Un from the river." Mor hated the river. Another child, a boy, drowned 2 years ago. Mor was sure the Noken lured the toddler into the river and drowned him. Mor said the malevolent god of darkness hated women and children. He sang bewitching melodies that beguiled the unsuspecting, leading them to their death. Far, Rin's father found the small child caught by a log downstream. Mor wailed when he put the drowned boy in her arms. They burned the body. The flames were hot, and the smoke rose high. Mor was comforted that the ancestors would accept her boy, but she never spoke of him again. The following spring, she gave birth to a girl. Far named her Un, which meant beloved. The name also honored Unr, the Norse goddess of the waves. Far hoped to protect the baby from the Noken by dedicating her to Unr, one of the daughters of Aegar, the god of the sea. Now Un was missing. Rin searched the farmyard, checking all the favorite spots in which she hid when she was little. She found the white kitten, but no Un. She widened her search to the sheepfold. Un was not there. Then she thought maybe Mor found Un and they were sitting down to finish the last of the mutton without her. At any rate, the toddler could not have wandered farther because she was still a bit wobbly on her feet. That is, unless she had tumbled down to the river. It was not far away. Still thinking about a bowl of mutton, Rin reluctantly headed downhill. She would check there and then run home. Pushing her way through the low branches above the bank, Rin heard singing. It was a male voice rising from the river. The song was low and mournful. Rin's heart jumped. The Noken. Maybe she would run back and get the men, but then what if the god drowned Un while she was running for help? Fear choked her. Did she have the courage to fight the Noken for the life of her little sister? She had no choice. Crying, Rin ran to the river, branches whipping her face. Desperately, she called Un's name. It was then she saw a low boat with a limp sail and felt a strong hand grab her by the wrist. The man had a yellow beard, and blue woad was painted under his eyes. Rin screamed, but he clapped his hand over her mouth. Rin bit his finger, but that only made the man grip her tighter. He pushed her to the boat and threw her in. Gag her, tie her up, and shove off. His speech was different than Rin's, but she understood enough of what he said. His orders were carried out by rough hands. Rin lay in the bottom of the boat and watched as the only world she had ever known drifted away. Chapter 2. The men in the boat seemed to forget about her. She lay in the bottom while they pulled at the oars. She knew when they left the river because the water became rough and the smell of salt was in the air. She pulled her body into a ball. She was too frightened to cry, too frightened to look at the men. She prayed to Freya to protect her. On the open water, the yellow-bearded man set the sail. 3 other men in the boat sat on wooden trunks, their eyes scanning the shore and the sea. They talked strangely. Some of the words she understood. What she could catch had to do with where they were and how best to get back to their home. The day receded, and a full moon hung over the water. The wind died, but the men did not make for shore. Instead, they took down the sail, applied themselves to the oars, and rowed into the night. She watched them until she could watch no more. When Rin awoke, she realized the boat no longer rocked with the motion of the sea. The light from a new day revealed she was alone. She sat up and peeked over the side of the boat. 3 men slept on the shore. One sat watching the sea. She lay back and worked her hands out of the rope. She pulled the gag out of her mouth, retrieved the roll of rye bread in her tunic and the knife from her belt. While she ate, she worked at cutting the rope that bound her to the boat. What if the men came back before she could finish cutting the rope and jump out? What happened to Un? Were Mor and Far now looking for her? She glanced over the side to look at the men. The one that had been sitting was now standing looking out to sea. Excitedly, he roused the others. Rin looked where he was pointing and saw a ship under sail, making for the shore. All 4 men were now standing, pointing, and shouting. They ran for the boat. 2 jumped in. 2 shoved the boat into the sea. The men at the oars pulled for the open water. The other 2 dragged themselves into the boat and grabbed their oars. Rin had not cut the rope in time. She curled into a ball so they would not see her hands were free. It didn't matter. The men took no note of her. The sun marked the hours across the sky as they pulled at the oars. The men raised the sail, but the ship steadily gained on them. Her kidnappers said little to each other. Their faces were drawn and grim. An arrow pierced the sail. It hit the foremost oarsman in the shoulder, drawing a curse from his lips. More arrows followed. Most missed their mark. Rin rolled close to the side near the approaching ship and made herself as small as possible. An arrow hit the yellow-bearded man, and he could no longer work his oar. Then the ship was upon them. It ran alongside, shooting arrows into screaming men. All four slumped to the bottom of the boat, filling it with their blood. Someone jumped into the boat. Rin looked up into the face of the Noken. No other explanation could be possible. His skin was black as night, his face as fierce as a god. A blade was clamped in his teeth. He was girt round the loins with animal skins. "Freya! Oh, Freya, save me!" mouthed Rin silently. He saw her, then saw the rope tied to her leg. Without a word, he went about the business of making sure the men were dead and dumped the bodies into the sea. He pulled down the sail and secured the boat to the ship with a line. Another climbed down. This one was certainly a man. His skin was like Rin's, but his hair and eyes were as black as the Noken's. He wore a leather breastplate over a wool tunic and was shod with leather sandals. A sword and knife hung at his side. He had a short beard, and his hair was cropped close to his head. The Noken pointed at Rin and said something incomprehensible. The man grunted. The man pointed at the trunk of the Yellowbeard. The Noken opened it, bringing out a sword that flashed in the sun. The other trunks were open, but Rin did not see what was inside them. The men in the tunic gave more orders and went back to the ship. Ropes were thrown down, and the trunks were hoisted out of the boat. There was shouting, and the ship raised its sail. Rin looked up to see the Noken throw her a wineskin and a loaf of bread. Truly, Freya was powerful. Rin escaped death and now was given food and drink. Blessed be Freya. Chapter 3. Rin freed her legs, drank from the wineskin, and ate the loaf. When the sun sank below the horizon and the archers could no longer see her, she would cut the rope from the ship, commit herself to Agar, and pray to reach land. The wine did its work well. Rin woke groggy to shouts coming from the ship. The sky was black, yet the sea reflected fire. She sat up to see torches blazing and hear men shouting. Silhouettes fought deadly combat before her eyes. Pulling out her knife, she slashed at the rope that held the boat to the ship. The rope was frayed to a thread when she felt the gunwale dip below the swell. She looked up to see men pulling themselves into the boat. Arrows from the ship struck the wood around her. Rin rolled to the side as the boat broke away. It was the Noken and two men in tunics. The Noken and one of the men took to the oars. The other man slumped to the deck, an arrow stuck in his back. As the oars put distance between the ship and the boat, arrows fell impotently into the sea. Screams and flames carried over the water until she saw the ship sink to the depths. At first light, a rocky shoreline appeared. The man dropped his oar and slumped into the bottom of the boat. The Noken turned his fierce face to Rin and jabbed a finger at the oar. She drew away. He raised his fist and pointed again. Her heart slamming in her chest, she stepped over the men on the deck and took the oar. The waves drove the boat. The Noken shouted incomprehensible orders. She neither understood nor had much strength to pull, but she did her best to match his actions. By the skill of the Noken or the mercies of Agar, a last wave threw the boat onto the shore. Rin jumped into the heaving surf to run, but the Noken was faster. He threw a rope around her neck yanking Rin to her knees. Glaring at her, his dark voice spit commands. This much she understood. She was ordered back into the boat. The Noken jumped to the rocky shore and secured the craft to a boulder. Returning, he glanced at Rin, yanked on her rope, and turned his attention to the men. One lay unseen, dead. The other was wounded, a red stain coloring his tunic. The Noken pointed at Rin. She understood she was to help the injured man out of the boat. The dead man was left to soak in blood and brine. A curious set of eyes noted the strange boat and the strange men. The eyes noted a female slave with a rope around her neck. A young boy, whose eyes those were, ran to tell his father what he discovered on the shore. Chapter 4. Through gestures and threats, the Noken made Rin to understand she was to ask for food from the man with the boy by his side. The speech was different, but Rin and the villager understood each other well enough. What will you take and trade for food? Rin said to the villager. She turned to the man in the leather breastplate and motioned, trading with her hands. He held up a shiny silver coin. Done, said the man with the boy. A large basket of bread, a wineskin, and dried fish were fetched in exchange for the coin. Rin had never seen money and wondered what magic could trade something so small for something so big. Barter was common between the farms near her home, but this was new to her. As the boy and man disappeared over a hill, Rin wanted to shout after them and tell them she was stolen from her home, kidnapped. She wanted to beg them to help her, but they had cold eyes for her and warm eyes for the silver coin. The rope was still around her neck, so she remained silent. The Noken served the man and tossed a dried fish to Rin. She ate greedily, but the salty fish demanded drink. She pulled on her rope. The Noken looked up in mid-bite to see her pointing at her tongue. He laughed. That was as frightening to Rin as his grimace. She pointed at the boat and pantomimed drinking from a skin of wine. He understood. He retrieved it, placing the basket, the remaining food, in the boat. The Noken offered the wine to the man. He drank. The Noken drank. He handed it to Rin. She drank. A black finger jabbed at a black chest. Nokosi! Noken? Nokosi! The black finger pointed at the man in the leather breastplate and said, Lord Barak. Rin repeated, pointing at each man, Nokosi, Lord Barak. A black finger jabbed her shoulder. Rin, I am Rin. Nokosi repeated, Rin, Rin. The girl looked at her captors, the white man and the black. She observed the white had power over the black, who was doing as he was bid. Maybe Nokosi was not the Noken. Maybe he was just a man. Nokosi worked all day digging a grave by hand. Barak sat by him. Rin was put to work washing blood out of the boat and hauling stones to the grave. If she balked at any command, Nokosi would draw back his fist and threaten her with his fierce face. It was easier to obey than to resist. When the body was laid in the grave, Barak knelt, arranged the tunic, placed silver coins on the dead man's eyes and a cloth over the face. He stood, lifted his arms, offered a supplication to the sky, and walked away. Nokosi put Rin to work covering the body with sand and rock. By sunset, the grave could not be distinguished from the surrounding land. Hidden away, The boy watched the stranger and his slaves. Chapter 5. As the sun set, Nkosi tied Rin inside the boat and walked away. She looked over the gunwale. Nkosi was serving Barak bread, fish, and wine. She fell back in the bottom of the boat, exhausted. As she licked salty tears, she asked Freya to give her strength to free herself and run. As she prayed, Nkosi poked his head in the boat. Rin, he was handing her bread, fish, and wine. Praise be to Freya, Rin murmured. Nkosi shook his head, not understanding her words, but understanding the expression on her face. He pointed at food and drink, naming each one in the language he shared with Barak. Rin repeated. Nkosi nodded. The last glimmer of light faded from the sky. Barak climbed into the boat, rolled up in a corner of a tarp, and went to sleep. Nkosi sat beside him. His black skin became one with the black sky. Rin watched him and did not know when she slipped into dreams. When she awoke, Barak sat while Nkosi slept. Oh, Freya, thought Rin, is there no escaping these men? That is when a hand reached over the gunwale by her head. Her scream shot Barak and Nkosi to their feet. Men climbed into the boat. Their introduction was a club that swung wide of Barak's head and a knife that nicked Nkosi's arm. Barak roared like a monster, yanked out his sword, and thrust it into the nearest intruder. Nkosi joined Barak back to back, screaming a war cry that froze Rin's blood. The villagers, farmers, and fishermen with delusions of thievery were no match for battle-hardened warriors. The attackers fled. Their numbers diminished. Nkosi ran to untie the boat from the boulder and shoved it into the water. Barak pulled at the oar as Nkosi jumped into the boat. The attackers rallied themselves and ran for the boat, but found the strange men were already beyond their reach. Such was the hospitality of the far north in the last years of the sea masters of ancient Carthage. Thank you for listening. To hear more of the story, please come back soon, or you may purchase your own copy on Amazon. Just follow the link below. Until next time.